Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tech Talk Travel collective session. Today's session is all about the consultants of our industry, and we've been blessed to have some wonderful people join us in this session today. And as I introduce them, I'll bring them into frame. And as with the previous collective sessions, the people who are attending this live stream actually submitted the questions for the agenda. So we'll be going through those talking points that have been suggested. So this is the consultant session, and we're looking very much forward to the conversation moving forward. So starting off, I will add to the conversation Charlotte Lamp-Davies. Charlotte is the founder of A Bright Approach. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And following Charlotte, we have Michaela Pappenhoff, who is the founder and managing director of H2C, based here in Dusseldorf, Germany. Michaela, thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have you.
Hello.
And thirdly, we have Mr. Greg Hopkins, who's joining us from the United States. Greg is the partner and senior managing director at Provision Partners. Greg, wonderful to have you. Thank you for joining.
Happy to be here, Andre.
And then we have Mr. Mark Fancourt, who is an old stalwart friend of mine. Mark is the co-founder of TRAVHOTECH and TestBeds Vegas. And Mark, wonderful to have you here as well. Thank you for joining.
Hey, man. Good morning from Las Vegas.
Good morning. And finally, Jeremy Rock. Jeremy is the owner of Rock IT Group, also based out of the US. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's great to have you here.
Likewise. Thanks, mate.
Okay, so as I said, folks, we do have the agenda, and I'd like to really get this conversation kicking off. The way we've structured the previous calls has been all about managing today, looking at tomorrow, and then consumer behavior. So if we start with managing today, obviously what we're going through is pretty much unprecedented, and I don't think we necessarily need to repeat all of these typical phrases that everybody's been hearing about. But one thing that I'd like to hear from each of you before we start digging into your own points is how are you as consultants currently communicating with and supporting your clients given this current situation? And it's, I guess you could say, uncharted territory. Obviously, everybody has been affected by this in one way or another. So perhaps, Charlotte, let's start with yourself, and perhaps you could give us a little bit of insight into how you've managed the dialogue and the conversation with your clients as this whole COVID-19 coronavirus crisis hit us.
Yes, indeed. And again, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to join today. I was in the position that I have for many, many years been doing a variety of both home working and going into an office. So I was relatively well set up, I would say, and thus I had already, since I set up my own consultancy a couple of years ago, I had already been meeting, if you like, my clientele on all of these variety of platforms that we are now all coming to terms with. What I have done with some of my clients is I've spent a significant amount of time guiding them through what platforms are available and where we're able to have the best and most mutually beneficial conversations. So it's been a little bit trial and error, and we're still, all of us, learning how to actually communicate as well as possible without the coming together. One of the things which I'm a real stickler for is that people use cameras. This is the closest we are going to get to actually feel together in some shape or form. So I take no prisoners when I go on calls and people either don't have a camera or feel that the hair is sticking out in all sorts of different directions. It does these days. We all work from home. We try to do our best. But I try to be quite pragmatic and practical about the kind of advice that I'm giving my clients, also because they will be having more and more of these types of conversations with their clientele. So it's very hands-on and very practical, I would say, certainly initially, and we just get together very regularly in order to keep the conversation going.
Great, great. The one thing I did want to mention actually before we also got started was the good thing about today's session is that we have representation from both sides of the pond, if you like, from the United States as well as from here in mainland Europe. And what I'd like to try to get out of the session by the end of it is where there may be some definite crossovers and similarities in terms of the approach that we're taking towards how we're dealing with this situation at the moment. Michaela, let's move across to yourself.
Yeah, maybe it sounds strange, but we have even more communicated over the past couple of weeks with our clients than before. And so what we did is we luckily end of last year, we switched to Office 365. So there was no problem in setting up all of these necessary technology requirements. And now most of the team is working from the home office, but we still have people working from the office. And we actually set up a lot of webinar sessions with clients to better understand their point of view. And we also introduced a public webinar to educate the industry in terms of how to improve their content, for instance. So that's what we did. And then also we talked to clients, reached out to us and said, well, can we extend the agreements? Some of them, we also agreed that we extend agreements free of charge, for instance, and we also swapping or exchanging services where quality checks might not be needed because the hotels are closed. Then we offer other services. So that's what we did over the past couple of weeks, and it's still ongoing.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Jeremy, how about yourself? How are you communicating with your clients at the moment, and what are some of the main issues that they're perhaps concerned about at the moment?
You know, we actually deal with a lot of construction projects.
Yep.
And that's actually been a kind of an interesting thing. Over here in the United States, we're considered, in many instances, an essential service. So a lot of the construction's actually been moving forward. But with a lot of downtime, I was going out to various sites, etc. That travel's obviously had to be reduced. We've had to, get pretty inventive in terms of what we're doing. The other challenge has been just scheduling of resources and what's out there. Now, shifting to some of our other clients, being realistic, a lot of them have actually either been laid off or furloughed, and others have actually reached out to us. So it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of, what's happening within our particular, client structure and what's happening. And I'm also getting a lot of feedback from those hotels and entities that are actually still in operation. So we've all obviously started doing a lot of conference calls, maxing out all of the online sessions, etc. We actually have been extremely busy because it's created so much extra effort to try to, coordinate these things. We're re-coordinating 6 times over. How do you project when you're going to reopen? How are you going to project when you have an opening date for a hotel? And how does that move into other things? So it's we've actually been very, very active in terms of calls, a lot more than what I had thought related to all these projects, because time is money, and funding all these projects and dealing with finances and things like that have become critical in these last number of weeks. But to be real, there's a number of people I know that are no longer employed with the entities that we were working with. It's been difficult.
Yeah, of course. Mark, how about yourself? You obviously, with both our outlets, entities, TRAVHOTECH and TestBeds Vegas, each have their own identity in their own right, and each work to do their own or to set their own agendas. How are you seeing it from your perspective, and what's it like in Vegas?
Yeah, well, what's it like in Vegas? Not good. Las Vegas obviously is impacted almost like no other, because the city literally exists for 42 million tourists to come every year, and we've sort of got both ends of the spectrum happening here in Las Vegas. Some companies have sort of excised a lot of staff. thousands and thousands, and then others have sort of done their best to try to muddle through. But beyond the specifics of Las Vegas, I tend to concur with Jeremy's points. I think there's two sides to the industry at the moment. There's obviously the construction side, and some construction, is either well funded or has their funding secured to carry on with projects so that can continue. The bigger challenge, I think, is for operational hospitality. But I guess, back to your point about, our two organisations, I mean, we probably get the benefit of I guess, being, a little, generous of spirit at the moment, given the situation that the industry's in, and we're all in it. It's not like we sit outside of it in our particular roles as a group here. We're very much in it and impacted as well. So, we just try to be helpful and provide whatever advice, and understand that in the short term, there'll be a level of impact on certainly technology projects in general, but just the sort of energy and workforce, as Jeremy touched on, that's available to really do anything.
Yeah. Good. And finally, Greg, from your perspective, how's the response been from your clients?
It's been interesting. It's nothing like I would have imagined. We're actually busier than I thought we would be, because the groups that are well funded and the groups that are using this time to improve their operations or improve their marketing plans or restructuring their offering in general have come to us to help to assist them in doing that, and their availability has been great. Unlike before, where you would call and they were just busy with things going on. So as things slowed down, it gave them time that they've always said if the world would stop, we'd have time to do this. Well, it stopped. So they're having that time is there, and we've been working with them, and we're doing a lot of projects now where we've altered our payment terms. So we're taking payment in arrears of a project instead of in the beginning of a project. So we're helping them out there. Plus, it keeps us busy during this time. So it's been interesting. There's been, like I said, there's been some people who have been very positive and knowing that now's the time they can improve their organization, both our hotel clients and our vendor clients. And there's others that are just trying to hang on, and they're not going to be. And when it does reopen and it does start coming back, they're going to just come back as they were, and that's a dangerous thing to go, because it's going to be a new world.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very much an interesting dynamic when things do start to come back to what we're perhaps somehow used to, and how the climate will look. All right, so let's move across to perhaps now a question that was submitted by Mark. As a result of the coronavirus situation, what do you each believe will be the pressing needs when it comes to technology in our industry? I think as everyone is realizing, there is going to be a new normal. A lot of us don't even know what that is, but perhaps there may be some assurity in saying that what that might very well be is a contactless type of environment, and how much can we support physical distancing or social distancing, as well as contactless environments, and what technology can be applied there. So perhaps, Greg, why don't we start with you on that one? How are you seeing, or how do you feel that might be managed?
Well, first, I think there's going to be two new normals. There's going to be a pre-vaccine normal and a post-vaccine normal. So the issues with social distancing, the issues with hygiene and everything will be very prevalent in the pre-vaccine times. I also think there may be a little bit of an overreaction with what's coming on. I don't know, because as we know, people are very soon to forget. So I think that especially once we get to a vaccine, the things you hear about having identification that you're immune to COVID, or you're COVID free, or having doctors in the lobbies, or all these, or temperature checks, and all the privacy issues that goes with that is going to be something that's there. But I do think that the result of this is the naysayers previously about contactless experiences, or the ability to have a contactless experience where you can check in on your phone, pick your room, get your mobile key. and go. I think those technologies will move forward because that value is there's a new value to those types of technologies that weren't there before. So I kind of see that as something that may come as a result for this. And it just may be me. I think a lot of the chief hygiene officer thing you hear about and that goes on, and the cleanliness. I mean, heck, I thought the rooms were clean before. So this whole new level of cleanliness will be something that fades away, I think, as we move into the new normal. But the whole, I think it'll be a boom for vendors that have a way for a guest, if they choose to be contactless, will be there. But I don't think the complete contactless experience will ever go away in hospitality.
Great. Michaela, how about yourself? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Europe, Middle East, our clients are mostly based there, so it's a little bit different. I think the hotel chains, the smaller hotel chains now really understand that they need to improve their direct sales, especially on their website. And that's where it comes to dedicating time and efforts and also some money to improve their website experience and also their technology that serves the internet booking engine. And also investments into CRM, for instance, to better understand how PMS, CRS, CRM, and revenue management systems all work together. So this is very important for our region here, as well as loyalty, because personalization is one key factor. And especially also city-specific information is important for the first domestic travelers that come back, because federal, states, and local authorities have often different regulations. And of course, we all know budgets are tight in 2020. So I think most of the hotels, they start to research technology now. This is not costly, and they do that internally. And they might need help from consultants, yes, but they won't be able to spend that much money on it. So we have even talked to clients who said we will be doing an RFP in 2021. But this year is really dedicated to internal research.
Okay, great. Are you finding, and this is a question to everybody, are you finding your customers coming to, or your clients coming to you asking, is this perhaps the right time for us to consider replacing our technology, given that we have empty hotels? Charlotte, you're nodding your head. Is that something you're hearing?
I'm sort of nodding my head in that.
You're on mute, darling.
Oh, am I on mute? No?
No, it's okay. I can hear you.
Okay. I predominantly work with the travel tech organization. So it's really what I hear is what their customers come and say to them. And I think one of the things that we talk quite a lot about is that the vendors, whether you are selling a product or a technology service, you need to be at the forefront of understanding exactly where your customers are right now. Not only do you need to be very productive and you need to be very persistent in your service to them, but you need to also be the one that gives that kind of guidance. You act as a consultant at this particular point in time to actually say, okay, we've had these things in the backlog. We've spoken about when we had a bit more time. We've spoken about already that you wanted to enhance, back to Michaela's point, you wanted to improve things already in your technology. You will not make it over the other line unless we start now. And then you have that collaboration where also the vendor needs to be very understanding that cash flow is tight. But I know from some of my vendors, I see that their customers, the TMCs that they work with, or the tour operators or the travel agents that are in their portfolio, they are asking for the vendors to help them to understand, where they ought to put their efforts and what research they need to do in and around which technologies they need to implement. As for the hoteliers, I think Greg is spot on. I ditto exactly what Greg said. He just said it better than I could, because I don't work directly with hoteliers so much. But I think anything that's a seamless, touchless, anything like that, that's kind of automated, those ones that have already got that partly implemented, they are going to be the winners. There can be no doubt about it in the short term, and then we'll see if the others come over on the other side.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting as well to see for those that don't have it, how quickly they'll be able to implement that technology into their existing tech stack. And perhaps those that are running on an older base will find the challenges around that. Let's move across to the other side of the pond. Jeremy, what about yourself? Are you seeing a situation where hotels might be considering a tech restack or a replacement of?
You know, that question's often asked. I think the biggest thing that I always see is it's a question of funds in a lot of instances. And the other side of it is that it's not as easily done as everybody thinks.
Exactly.
You know, you've got to schedule this stuff. What are the resources of all the solution providers right now? They've been hit hard as well. A lot of them have had to furlough or retrench, etc. So this question of actually putting new tech in right now has to be well thought out. What tech are you putting in? And how's that actually going to help you down the road? Because we've got a very different playing field going forward. So you've got to be very careful about how you're doing that. A lot of the key decision makers are so busy trying to run around and manage things right now. We deal with a lot of independents, a lot of brands as well, but the issue there is primarily funding. And what people haven't realized or haven't really highlighted is the fact that the banks have put constraints on all loans and lending. The ramifications of that are dramatic. It's across all fronts. They're even reevaluating loans that are existing now. So to fund these things, to get the right approach, to think about it. If you're planning a renovation, I mean, this is the time, really, But I think if you start to look at what the actual reality is, it takes a lot of forethought. You've got to think about these things. And people right now are just struggling to make sure they either got payroll or getting things done. You're looking at occupancies of either single digits or maybe up to 15% of those hotels that are open, and the rest of them are shuttered. So it's the challenge. It's always whenever you want to invest, you don't have the cash flow to do it, right? So you're more caused to be a bit more conservative in these instances than not, right? So that's kind of what we're seeing. But I mean, I think everybody's just trying to do the best they can right now. I do think it's going to be a good time to reassess your technology. And more importantly, coming out of this, to everyone's point, the contactless, aspect of things and how you come through it and what technology you need to, reinvest in, that's an absolute need is a critical focus right now.
Yeah, I fully agree. Mark, moving across to yourself, how are you approaching this scenario now from a business perspective in relation to your industry relationships?
Well, I think your industry relationships continue on, and I mean, I do have to say that, unfortunately, I know quite a few people who are no longer currently engaged in the industry as a result, and naturally because of that, I think one of the things I've found is you tend to have a lot more dialogue, and I think Greg touched on this before. People have a bit more time. So I'm finding that, on a global basis, a lot more connecting with people because they've actually got some spare time to reconnect. And naturally through that comes discussion of the situation because everyone's in, as some of the taglines go. But I was just going to touch on the last point too. I think, agreeing with what everyone had to say, I think, when it comes to the large driver of what's going on in technology in our industry, that is being guest-driven anyway, as a result of consumer tech and everything they see and read. And I think moving forwards, one of the things that we're hearing a lot in media at the moment for our industry is cleaning tech and the additional, which, as I said, I agree with Greg. I think at any reasonable standard of hospitality, our industry has been very good at cleaning and hygiene. It certainly underpins what we do in our industry, but naturally people are concerned. It pays to talk about it. But going back to his point, I think there may be a bit of hedging on finding out just exactly how the customer does feel about that, which might drive some investment. But I also tend to agree. I think that at some point we have to go back to some sort of a normal normal sort of approach to life and everything we do, including travel. And I think we might see that things are perhaps not quite as extreme as it seems at the moment. But we'll see. There's certainly a lot of talk about it at the moment. I think the other thing too is one of the things we've been questioning is, what's our role going to be as an industry in terms of keeping information on hand about status more than anything, and does that, could that possibly mean that if we're keeping health information in our industry, which is not something we've done in the past, what does that mean for our systems and industry? What does that mean for compliance? Does it expose us to things like health data regulations and HIPAA and things like that? So we'll see. I mean, that hasn't really been delved into deeply yet, but it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I think a lot of, especially around the health piece, it's going to have to do with a lot of how much people are going to be willing to share their health data publicly as well. So that's another component. Okay, look, moving right along. Jeremy, you mentioned earlier about systems, and one of your questions here, I think, is a good one, and that's the potential renegotiation of existing system contracts. So obviously with the hotels that have been shut or running on a very low occupancy, what can be done to either restructure or renegotiate some of the existing contracts that they either have on a monthly OPEX cost or that are affecting ongoing support. So even though the hotels are closed, they are still obviously responsible for their monthly charges that are owed by contract. Now, some of the vendors that we spoke to last week are saying that they're giving them a break clause period, if you like, where they can say for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months, there's no charges on fees or support fees being charged. But obviously that's not possible for every option here. So let's start with you, Jeremy, given this is your question. I think it's an interesting one. What's your thoughts around this?
Well, I'm kind of a nuts and bolts guy, and I kind of look at what can we do now as opposed to what everybody's talking about, trying to predict the future, right? What we can do right now is stop some of the hemorrhaging. And I think one of the issues that I sort of see is, how can we go back to a lot of our providers? And I'm not just talking about the system or application providers, because they've actually been great. Some of them are actually offering 3 months free, things like that. Start to look at your circuits, your telecommunications. Start to look at all of your TV service. There are programs out there right now where they will delay things, or they will reduce it based on your occupancy and things like that, right? Because what's concerning ownership, and what's concerning a lot of the management companies is the fact that we talk about all new tech. These guys are just trying to pay the bills, and they're on the hook for all this stuff. If you can renegotiate a contract so you pay them at the back end, to Greg's point, it's kind of like we're all in this together, right? They realize it, they know it, they don't want to see you fail because they don't get anything in the end, right? So cell phone companies, even all these guys, go back, see what you can do. The challenge that I think you have is that a lot of the hotels, if they've been shuttered or closed or running at a low occupancy, are running on the smell of an oil rag, basically, right? So essentially, it's down to some key critical people. They don't have time to do this, but it's a lot of money because we don't know when they're going to open up again, right? So I think the key thing that I sort of look at is, I know that there's a lot of focus on what are we going to do when we come out, how to market this, how to do that, what can we do to stop the people right now, and I think that comes back to focusing on those areas, right?
Yeah, agreed. And Michaela and Charlotte, from your perspective, on this side of the pond again, on Europe, what are you hearing in terms of renegotiation of contracts? Is there a sense that it's in favor of the hotel operator, or how are you seeing it?
Yes, I think we, first of all, as we also provide a product, some of the hotel chains reached out to us immediately, asking for a contract extension. Of course, we agreed to that, but then we see that the government in Germany, for instance, has released a law that the rent can be postponed for 3 to 6 months. So, but of course, it has to be paid back. But that's, of course, of great help for this difficult period of time. And then I think we see a lot of our clients, they are very well organized when it comes to reaching out to the vendors. And we talked to a lot of clients who reached out to all of their vendors and paused agreements, for instance.
Yeah, I did know that very much. What Jeremy was saying around from a vendor's perspective, which is what I represent on this particular call, I guess. We are definitely being asked. A lot of clients of my vendors are asking for some level of negotiation and understanding around payments. I mean, I do try to tell my vendors that it's very, very important right now to help as much as possible and to be very understanding of everybody's situation. And then we're back to this, we're all in it together. However, no one can, of course, act as bank for everybody else. So it is about finding out a balance on those issues. But I certainly know that the vendors that I work with, they're all giving an awful lot back because they see it as in we need to help our clients over this line in order for us to have a business going forward. And back to Jeremy's point, go out and negotiate everything at the moment. I do it personally, and I suggest that most of my clients, they go and do exactly the same, whether it's telecoms or office rent or space, everything. Just go for it. There's absolutely no point in not asking because it's in everybody's interest that we get through this.
Absolutely. Okay, let's keep moving through the items. There's some really good points in here that I'd still like to cover.
Andre, can I bring up one thing?
Sorry, yes, please, go ahead.
I totally agree. It's important that everyone tries to negotiate with vendors that they can. And I think a lot of newer technologies may have a little bit of an advantage because they don't have the overhead or the legacy, where they may be able to replace an existing solution with their newer solution that may cost less. But I think a thing that people often overlook are the vendors themselves, and that they're struggling through these times too, because they've had revenues go from good to bad because the hotels pay, but there's not a lot of representation in the governments that I've heard of for the vendors themselves. So they're going to struggle, and we know that this industry is not going to survive without the vendors, the technology vendors behind them, and it's going to and I pray there's none, but there'll probably be a good number of vendors that just don't come out on the other side of this because of these times. Because if the hotel can't pay them and the vendors can't pay their employees, and then and where do they go from there? So this isn't like we're dealing with the big companies. You know, there are a lot of big companies involved. There's a lot of small companies that live month to month that are providing great technologies for hoteliers. And it's not like you can just say, I can't pay you now. Well, they've got people to pay too. And because it's not, like I said, it's not like we're dealing with everyone's not dealing with Google, or everyone's not dealing with Amazon in the world. They're dealing with Bob's auto keys, you know, and he does a good job with what he's doing, but Bob's not going to be around if there's not a way for them to get paid, because they're not getting the same sort of support, I feel, from the governments that are out there, because the travel associations are saying, yeah, let's fund the airlines, let's fund the hotels, but the vendors, you don't hear them getting those checks. They're just kind of grouped in with small business, and we know what the rat race is for them to get funds from governments.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Greg. You make a very, very good point there. And I think as unfortunate as it sounds, or it might be, that we will lose some very good vendors out in the marketplace because of this. And I'm not sure how it is in the United States, but here in Germany, where I'm located, the government has opened up these programs whereby, based on the size of your company, you can apply for, certain funding from the government to help you through these periods. But at the end of the day, as helpful as it is, it's not going to save your business if you're already struggling. It's only going to keep you afloat probably for 2 or 3 months. Michaela, I'm sure you're aware of what I'm talking about. But yeah, so I do they have a similar program going on in the States as well, where they're offering?
They do, but the money keeps running out. I mean, they keep offering trillions of dollars, and they have hundreds of millions of thousands of people that are applying, and the money runs out when you get and you have to be, it's a very autonomous process that you go with, where you fill out your application, you don't hear from anyone, and then you'll get a request for something. Fortunately, Provision has received some, which is helpful as a small business, but that was just recently. The interesting thing is we've picked up a couple of clients asking us to do due diligence on companies. So there are investment groups out there that are being a little wolf right now, if you will, saying that, well, who do you think's not going to survive, and are they worth maybe picking up when this thing comes back together? So we've started to do some work with some vendors on that.
Yeah. And it leads actually perfectly, Jeremy, into your next point that you submitted, and that is during the reopening of the hotels and its impact of systems and technology, given the fact that so many hotels are furloughing staff or laid off staff, they're going to need to have their system providers to assist in bringing their hotels back online when they do open. But then again, vendors themselves are also letting off staff, and they may not also be available. So given that many of the system providers themselves have reduced that, it's important that hotels, I think, also work on putting together strategic reopening plans that address their specific system needs and requirements. And perhaps, Mark, you might be able to talk to this point as well, because, we say we're in this together now, but we're also going to be in this together when we come out of it. And I think that shouldn't be forgotten.
Well, no, I mean, it's true. And I think going back to Greg's point too, which I also concur with, everyone has had to make sacrifices, and when demand comes back, there probably won't be the same amount of people to meet the demand. And I think the other thing, to Jeremy's question, is that, number one, you would like to think that, the smart players to obviously bring back the people that are furloughed because they know your business, they know your systems, but of course that's dependent on how long people can hold out individually. I think the other challenge around that is that, it's the timing issue, and it's not. It's unlikely from everything that we're reading and hearing that when properties reopen, they're reopening at full scale. We might find, floors shut out here in Las Vegas. For example, MGM has said that, out of their 10 or 11 casinos on Las Vegas Boulevard, they'll only start with 2. So I think the challenge will be, how do you, re-educate? How do you make sure that you get your team a level of exposure, depending on how long this goes on, and yet still stagger your opening while you're having travel demand come back and revenue come back and staff come back, in line with what's going on in the operation. So I think it's going to be quite challenging unless people are able to re-secure their previous personnel.
And will it be the same staff? I mean, you basically have a bunch of free agents now, right? People can go where they want to go. So will the stronger companies pick up the top talent from other companies of people who were furloughed when it does come back, and how long does it take? I mean, when people let go, when people go of their entire sales and marketing teams, until when they come back, well, what's the guarantee that salesperson is going to come back to your company, or will he be recruited away to another company? And then if it takes, let's say, 90 days for a salesperson to be producing at a normal level, I mean, that's another 90 days into the comeback, even to be effective during those times. So you sit there and you wonder, when you hear some great talent from great organizations has been furloughed or laid off, are there guarantees that you're going to get that guy? You're going to get that guy back, or is that senior VP that was working for Marriott now going to come back and work for Hilton during that time? And just the whole culture was just going to change.
Yeah. Okay. Let's change let's flip it a bit here. Now we have a question actually coming in from one of our audience members, Peter Sattler, who is actually a lecturer at one of the German hotel schools here. His question is, and I think it's a good one, perhaps for Jeremy or Mark, will hotel companies change their portfolio because of the corona crisis into a more ownership real estate model, or will they perhaps structure or stay within a franchise model? Do you see do you see that mix being changed at all, or is there any discussion around that?
Well, I think, it's actually a very, very good question, because it isn't the first time that I've seen some of the larger publicly traded entities, etc., maybe ditch some of their lower performing properties and move into something else, right? And so that's actually one side of it is you've invested all this money. The unfortunate part about the way that a lot of the hotels are financed is that some people will just walk away, right? And then take their dollars and move it into something else. But I think a lot of it has to do with when are we going to come out of this, and what's it going to look like? So, for example, some of the hotels that are affected now are the large meeting space, hotels, the big boxes, right? And meetings are going to take potentially a little while to regroup, because they take so long to organize, and those hotels could be had at a discount right now, because to fill a big box hotel and pay the expenses on that is not easy. So I think you're going to see some changes for sure in the real estate. There's going to be some bargain pickups, and the question is, who has the money to do it, right? And so I think certainly the trading of assets is going to be something that comes out of this for sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to think that there'll be
once we get out of the coronavirus situation, are you hearing anything from your clients, or what, if anything, are you hearing from your clients and peers regarding general industry plans for their technology post coronavirus? Charlotte, let's start with you. Are you hearing anything that they may be planning?
Well, I think everything is definitely going through a bit of an overhaul as well. And then I think a lot of clients are narrowing the field down. Again, it is at the moment, it is a critical situation for everyone. Cash flow, lots of people laid off or furloughed or wherever we might be. So in actual fact, most of the vendors that I happen to work with, they've not had to lay off many people. So it seems that the wheels are still in motion. But let's go back to a point that Greg mentioned earlier. Yeah. Vendors are not being sort of, are really not being put in focus. But what I suggest all the time is that if you're out there and your customers are renegotiating, the contract with you, they need to be very strong around actually explaining back to the customers their own predicaments. And I have heard some very encouraging story where the partnership is working out because both is trying to help each other over on the other side. But this is more from an SME perspective. And so these are also I'm not saying that the larger vendors don't have those very personal relationships with their customers, but certainly my vendors who are sort of more SMEs, they very much have that very personal relationship. And again, they are focusing in on the back end of the vendors. They're focusing in on improving the various products that they sell on to their vendors and making it an even better product now that they have an opportunity to get through their own backlog, rather than have a lot of new sales coming in that always ends up going to the front of the queue. So I think the customers of my vendors, they are looking at how to make as much money as under the circumstances, and asking the vendors, to kind of help them continuously to improve slightly better products for them. So that's really where we're landing at the moment, I would say.
Okay. And Michaela, what about yourself? Before we move across to the US side, what are you hearing from your clients in relation to any technology post coronavirus?
When we talk to clients, we actually hear a lot that they are going to review their current technology infrastructure completely. So, and this is not only in the German-speaking markets, this is Europe and Middle East and Israel as well. So they are really proving what is there today, and then would like to find out if they really have got the technology they need in order to work with the systems. So And then we also get feedback that they need help with some guidelines they need to put together. So I mentioned that earlier. We have a lot of new standards now, and I think Marriott is working on hygiene standards. Accor is working on standards, but then the smaller regional hotel chains, which we have a lot in our region, they need guidelines as well. And then who provides this? And this seems to be an industry topic that nobody is looking at the moment for those hotels.
Indeed. All right. And Mark, how about from your side?
Yeah, I think sort of both ends of the spectrum is what I've had discussions about, Andre. Some have just said, look, capital project in general will be postponed. You know, and going back to some of the points earlier, I think Jeremy said, you know, you've either got cash or you don't, and if you don't, then probably not going to get too much, and you're probably not going to want to spend too much either. But then, you know, some see this time as an opportunity, and you know, I reflect on a previous part of my life going through the global financial crisis, where we invested perhaps more than we ever did through that phase to retool and come out of, you know, this, obviously not as extreme as this situation, but the slowdown of business, better prepared for the future. Although, going back to some of the other points too, I think just depending on guest sentiment coming out of this and what they expect as a traveller in the more immediate term is going to have some level of impact on where technology might shift in terms of priority for industry in general.
Yeah. Greg?
I think the technology, like I said before, I think the technology impact will be interesting to see. I think it'll be hoteliers will have to react to what guests are looking for, or what their requirements are. They won't have the cash to overinvest in those things as they are. Fortunately, kind of like a new opening, the demand will probably be low. Actually, it'll probably be very high at the beginning and then wane out. It's kind of like a brand new restaurant opening where everybody wants to see it for the first 2 weeks, and you think, wow, this is a great success. And then you find out in week 3, 4, and 5 that they may not be there. You may get the same thing because it'll be, you know, you'll have to see, are there reinfections? Are there more hotspots in the world? Will that stop everything again? Will it stop harder this time? And will they even be more cautious next time? Or, God willing, everyone goes back to travel again, and it doesn't happen, and everything is good, and people start to meet again and start to have that. I mean, obviously, I think like CRM technology will play big, because you're going to see a lot of local travelers first and regional travelers that go with that. Business will probably come back first, because they'll feel the need to get out to their customers and to see their customers. Meetings will come along slower, if not any other reason. They have to plan for the meetings and pick a date that they know they are. I mean, here in the U.S., we've had I've already seen a couple of conferences that have scheduled, and then they've already postponed again, moving back into the fourth quarter. But I can tell you right now, if everything holds the way it is, November and December are going to be crazy months for meetings in this industry. It's going to be so that's, and you got to be able to, you know, everything's got to be able to support that, and with what's going on and having the, you know, the funds to do that.
Mm-hmm. Are you getting a sense in the US that things will start to be back to normal by November? Is that a general consensus then?
I mean, High Tech is scheduled for October. It looks like that's going to happen. NPI's World Conference was moved to November. HT Next, which is the HT&G conference, was just moved from August, which was supposed to be last week, and has now been moved to the first part of December. So yeah, you're starting to see a little bit. Now, the interesting aspect is that I haven't seen anything from High Tech yet, but HT Next and the MPI conference are both implementing a virtual part to their conference. So it's kind of a backup plan where they both said that, hey, if we can't meet in person, we will still meet virtually. And that's a lot for the educational content that's associated with those conferences.
Yeah, I was just going to, I have a contact that's pretty connected in the global meetings industry, and the sentiment there is that this year is largely sort of finished. Even here in Las Vegas, speaking to some of the large venues, everything cancelled between now and the end of the year. However, on the flip side, and these are major events. I won't mention brands or names, but then have rebooked in 21 for everything, and with a very extended window going out 5 or 7 years after that for reconfirming the events. I wonder as things slowly open back up, whether volume meetings might still be restricted for some time to come by government anyway.
Yeah, I think that's quite likely. Mark, Charlotte, what are your thoughts? I mean, what I'm trying to get at is that is there a general consensus from the clients that you're talking to about a particular direction that they see that they're going to be moving towards, or is there going to be a particular technology that they may be requiring to support them?
Did you mention my name? Because you were just cut off.
Sorry, no, I said Charlotte.
Okay.
But we'll come to you afterwards, Michaela.
I will have to be maybe controversial and say at the moment, mostly it's about survival.
Yeah, no, be controversial. It's fine.
I'm sorry. There are, of course, an awful lot of extra stuff in all of the conversations. But everybody's watching their cash flow. Everybody's watching what the next directive is from the individual governments where they are. My clients are based all over the world. I have only one particular customer here in the UK. So it's very scattered. And I hear, of course, quite a lot of different things, but I also hear a lot of similarities from across. It is about being able to service your customer as well as possible and keep as many staff in place, occupied, asking, it's much more for me, what I see and what I hear, it's much more practical right now. Give it another couple of months, yes, we're looking at how to improve on the products and on the service, looking at how to support the customers, but it's early days. I think a lot of vendors certainly are very aware that this is a long, we're in for the long, long run here. And going back on events, I think it's done this year.
Yeah, I have a feeling with events, again, I can't talk for what's going on in the US, but I think you in Europe can basically write this year off. Yeah. Michaela, please.
Yeah, we're not going to have the support in Europe for that.
No. Michaela.
Yes, I think events is also particularly interesting for hotels to organize events on a legal side, because there is a legal issue with the events space at the moment being discussed in our industry, where hotels could be reliable for guests becoming ill, and insurance is not paying for that, so you can't put an insurance on that. So the idea is to just rent the space to the people rather than providing any meeting and event services anymore. So I assume that this part of our industry, we will see a big change here.
Absolutely. All right, great. So let's move on then in terms of the technologies that are needed. Michaela, you mentioned earlier before that you've already been working with your customers about ways that they can strengthen their direct sales. What other, I guess, strong technologies and own direct sales is what you've mentioned here are needed in order to strengthen the confidence of guests in the recovery phase? But I mean, yes, that's one element, but what are other aspects that you each feel are really going to be core components that's going to give that confidence back to the traveler that it's actually going to be okay to travel again. We spoke earlier when we had the hoteliers session that there's going to be an emphasis on the hygiene within the hotel, and that perhaps there may be within the Booking.com or within the hotel's website a stamp of approval saying that they meet a certain hygiene requirement. Where do your clients see that there's going to be that extra requirement in terms to build that confidence again to the traveler? Jeremy, how about yourself?
Well, I think, obviously everybody's focused right now on getting some kind of certification in place. And I know Hyatt's already moved in the news that I read. They've already moved in that direction. But I think the other side of it is actually just implementing, how are we going to implement it, right? And, what does that mean in terms of, exacting that confidence out of travelers, To Greg's earlier point, I think a lot of the sentiment here is that you'll start to see travel towards the end of the year, and it will be mainly domestic, and then eventually move into the international markets. But a lot of it depends on what happens with airlines, a lot of local travel, etc. I think there is going to be a focus on cleanliness. I think there's going to be a lot of the larger brands are bringing out the top 10 areas within a guest room to clean. You're starting to see some new technology for cleaning. And I think the other side of it, though, is going to be, the contactless technology and being able to check in and what are the rules and regulations. You're already starting to see, in the media now, thermal imaging cameras, etc., for both guests and staff. And so I think the more you can build around that program to just at least give people the comfort level that they are able to come to hotel, initially everybody's reducing seating capacity in restaurants. You're starting to see, rotation of rooms right now where, guest rooms aren't being used for 3 or 4 days. And if the hotel's at low occupancy, you can do that. But once things start to ramp up, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. But I think the big thing is a lot of people here in the US, from a sense, certainly, where we are eager to get out again, eager to start, moving things forward. And I think depending on where we are with regards to, either a vaccine or some kind of solution, that's going to encourage people to sort of get out. But it's going to be a process, no question, to get that done. And I think, certainly the, focus on cleanliness is there, and it's creating some kind of standard, at least comfort level, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the same way you see restaurants today that have health inspections because of in the past where they were concerned about being served contaminated food. I wouldn't be surprised to see hotels with ratings where they'll be inspected by a government agency on a non-announced basis, where that's the only way you're going to install consumer confidence, because I don't know if the consumers necessarily trust the brands to say that, hey, we've got this new cleaning protocol and we're going to do this. I think it's going to take someone to put a sticker on a window that says they've got an A rating or an A plus rating for cleanliness and they're meeting standards, and that's I think that people are going to look for that. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, they did it to restaurants years ago, right? Because people were getting sick when they went to bad restaurants. So the only way you could be sure that this hotel is clean is saying, okay, someone's put a stamp on there that they're following, they're within regulations. Right now, each brand is coming out with their cleaning standards. I don't think that's going to be the end all. I think there'll be a industry standard for all hotels.
Agreed. How do you feel that companies like Airbnb and Sonder, for example, are going to comply with those types of standards when they do come out? Because ultimately, I think they're going to be held to the same standards. They're going to have to be. And there has been some, talk on LinkedIn. Many people feel that this might even be the death knell for companies like that. I personally don't think it is, but I will be very curious to see how they respond in terms towards the hygiene standards.
Yeah, I think that going back to Greg's point and going back to the concept of a certification of cleaning, I think that if anything, probably the homestay companies are in a better position because, my view is that anyone who's smart will bring in a proper commercial grade cleaner, and there'll be documentation to show that it's been done. In terms of who did the work and what they did, which I think is a little bit more difficult in a hotel. And going back to Greg's point about certification, the Singapore government, I think maybe 3 weeks ago, came out with their standards for cleaning for Singapore hospitality. But I think the bigger question becomes, well, how are you going to verify that? I mean, the Singapore government going to have someone in the hotel after each room gets cleaned with a seal of approval? No, they're not. So I think, eventually, again, I wouldn't have said that in any decent standard hotel we had a cleaning issue anyway. I think that it's just now much more topical because the guest is focused on it, so we need to draw some focus to it. But once upon a time I used to run housekeeping, and there's a lot of care and attention applied to the regimes and the types of chemicals and the hygiene standards in a hotel because we're expected to provide that standard, as an industry.
Absolutely. And I think we generally do, but I think it comes back to this consumer trust again. Charlotte, sorry, you wanted to say something?
I sort of ditto quite a lot that's been said, but I certainly think never ever underestimate the power of Airbnb, as so many to the detriment, found out, particularly all the hoteliers. And I think there will be many, many travelers out there, who've had a better experience of cleanliness at an Airbnb that they have had in some hotels. That's a fact. And so, again, we need to have a rubber stamp on something. It goes back to the point of setting a standard, and Airbnb will do the same. These are clever people. They know they have to do that to keep attracting that huge, more people stay in an Airbnb than they stay anywhere else. So let's start with that for a fact, for starters. So of course they're going to work that out, just as hotels are going to have to work it out. At the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. Once the borders, there's nowhere to go. We can't go anywhere. So this is an interesting conversation to be had in the first place. We can't go anywhere. If we could go somewhere, we would have to be quarantined for 2 weeks before going to the hotel. And where would we stay? So it's all sort of so. It's all just very difficult to have the conversation right now because we don't know what the world would look like once we start to open. But we will have to have things certified in order to get that consumer trust back in. But I don't think an Airbnb is going to go under because of this. Maybe it would have to change certain things, but so will all the hotels. It's just hospitality will need to look very, very carefully at what they offer.
Airbnb will issue standards, and they already have. I mean, I have a home that I sell on Airbnb, and they told me how to clean my house. Can you rather go to an Airbnb than a hotel if you want a social distance? I mean, it could be safer, and I can bring my Lysol and my wipes and wipe down whatever I have to have at that house anyway. Airbnb will be just fine. They'll probably have an easier time getting consumer trust and staying somewhere than some of the other hotels. Because we used to, before this, check. I used to grade hotels by saying, is the room clean? Do they have great Wi-Fi? And is there good pressure in the shower? Those are primarily my requirements on whether I stayed or went back to a hotel again. If it was dirty, I'm not going to go back. If the Wi-Fi was bad, I'm not going to go back. And if it was a horrible shower, I'm not. Those are my things. So it's not a real stretch for me to travel again in the room. I'd be more concerned about the people around me than actually in the room itself.
I absolutely agree with all that has been said, and I think that coming back to the hotels discussion, the mega chains do that already, but we need to educate our industry to insist more on loyalty and what comes with loyalty programs. They don't necessarily need to be points-based, of course, benefits-based or whatever, but I think our industry, when we did this CRM study last year, we found out that hotel chains do not really personalize communications with the guests. And that's something that is very important now in order to build trust and confidence, and in order to prove that, for instance, hygiene standards are being met. So I think loyalty will become very different.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, again, given the focus that the major chains put on their loyalty programs, may also actually do quite well from. So, okay, great. Look, last question moving into today's session. We've spoken about getting the consumer's confidence, but how about the actual employees' confidence? So when things do start to ramp up again and people start to want to go back to work or go back to work, what new way of working is going to be necessary to increase the employee confidence, and how can companies best support their employees during that process? Because of course, it's not just about the guests coming to the hotels, but also the staff that work there, as well as the tech providers who have staff go on site. So there's a responsibility really from the employee's perspective. So how do you see that working out? What type of measures will be put in place around that?
Well, it's funny. There's a restaurant here in Orlando that was making a big deal that they were reopening their restaurant under government guidelines, and he was complaining he couldn't get his employees to come back to work. In some cases, they were making more off of unemployment than they were making in their wages there, with the reduced crowds coming back. So it's a big. You have to earn the employees' trust that you're going to be able to protect them while they're there. Again, I think it's something that's going to fade over time, and as we especially in a post-vaccine area, but you have to, and the companies that have furloughed their employees have not communicated to them during this time, they're gonna lose some loyalty, and they're gonna have to have an HR aspect to this that they didn't realize when they went into it.
Yeah, it's particularly.
I think there's also.
Sorry.
I think there's also the aspect of, showing them just what you're trying to do from the guest perspective, but also doing it from the employee's perspective, right? So in terms of any kind of, I mentioned thermal imaging for staff, etc., and creating an environment for them that actually, is safe and where they feel like they can come to work and not be exposed, so to speak. And you're starting to see this play out with regards to all of the provision that's going on right now. There are hotels that are open right now that are dealing with this and having to actually, work through all of these issues, right? And so I think it's going to be a very similar approach. And to Greg's point, I know certainly from our client standpoint, they're targeting key resources. So, they're going to want to make sure that those resources are comfortable with their working environment and with what's going on. And in some cases, it's going to mean some big changes with regards to how hotels do business. So for sure, it's, if you want the top echelon of staff, etc., you're going to need to make sure that you have things in place. And then there's the whole legality of it, right? So we haven't even started here with regards to the potential lawsuits of what's going to come down from all of this. And I think, the point's well taken that, we're going to be looking at it from a number of different vantage points. One of them is going to be legal. One of them is going to be, what do we need to do for our staff?
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Jeremy.
Here in Las Vegas, the major unions that represent a lot of the staff on Las Vegas Boulevard are in exactly that circumstance. They're saying, well, we're not ready to come back to work yet because we're not comfortable about the environment and the safety associated with being at work. And of course, Las Vegas being a city that is entirely visitor driven, we've done quite a good job with maintaining, a good status with the coronavirus in general, but that's purely because we've stopped travel essentially. Our population in Las Vegas basically assembles on the Strip to look after visiting people. And of course, going back to some of the things that have come out even with CES as far back as January, the volumes that we get here mean that it's very difficult to control. I'm not quite sure how you check the temperature of thousands and thousands of people coming into a casino property for whatever the reason is, with multiple access points. But naturally the staff are concerned, and it's a matter on the table for union negotiation at the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Michaela, please.
and I think lots of employees have suffered from the crisis, being it due to unpaid leave or Kurzarbeit in Germany, as we call it. So fear comes on top to completely lose their jobs. And we can only imagine what this does to the mindset of the society. And that's not only in our industry, it's across all industries, of course. So I think what we need is tactics to increase confidence and trust. And companies must build up more equity capital to stabilize their business, because in the past we have seen the speed of expansion versus more time for quality. I think that's something that we really need to look at. Hotel concepts with the environment in mind will definitely grow, as their strategies will create a very different commitment for employees. So this is at least what we see here in Europe. And this is the best time to start creating sustainable concepts, also in harmony with the nature. So I think hotels can do a great job here. And I think that's also, to me, very important.
Yes, it's a very good point, Michaela. In fact, that's actually a bit of an underlying theme that's been mentioned in all of these sessions. So I think that's definitely something to consider. Okay, before we wrap this up, I'd like to just comment or give some feedback in terms of the comments that we've received. There's a question and there's a comment. So I'll start with the question, and it's from David Chesler. David's asking, what happens if within 1 year there actually is a vaccine, treatments and similar? Does this change our planned solutions that we're actually seeking now? It's a good question.
That's a great question.
Jeremy, what do you think?
I think, I think to some extent it's going to, but I don't think that we're going to go back and reset completely to where we were. There's definitely something that's coming out of this. There's no return. I mean, I even equate it down to the way we're doing business, right? If you take a look at it, and I'm going to digress here, if you take a look at a lot of the commercial real estate right now, where you have offices, etc., we're already hearing from people that I know within the commercial real estate business that there's a percentage of staff that will not return back to the office. There's a percentage of staff that may not travel. We've gotten so used to communicating on these platforms now that it's going to change the dynamics of what we do and how we encourage people to travel, right? And so I think to some extent, I do see a resetting, because I think once everybody feels comfortable that the fact that they're not going to, the impact of this virus is going to be minimized, that's one thing. But I don't think it's going to change some of the parameters with what we're dealing with and what we've all done. And it's worldwide. That's the other thing that I think is important to understand. It's not localized to, one country or whatever else. Like everybody else on this call, I'm in touch with people across the world and across the globe, and I'm seeing the exact same thing there. And we've gone through this for too long now for it to reset completely. But I don't think, to Greg's point, that it's going to be something that keeps us from doing things going down in the future. I mean, people have been cooped up for X amount of time right now, and they're already going crazy, right? So I think it's kind of going to be a mix.
Yeah,
I would concur on that, and I think that the fact is that when we do come out, say this scenario, David, it's a great question. And if we do come out in a year's time and there's a vaccine, this has still been a year. And that will have done such a lot to all of us on so many, many, many levels, including Jeremy's point, Greg's point earlier on, particularly the home working. We've been talking about, creating a work-life balance for 20 years. Hallelujah. If it took a pandemic to realize that we can do so much stuff this way, actually better and more effectively than using all of our time and efforts, to commute backwards and forwards into offices, there is a real opportunity to actually truly understand how we can still be very, very productive professionally, but also have a good private life and have time enough to recuperate and be, the best we can possibly be. So we are all going to have to hopefully learn something from this. People, I think somebody else has said this before me, people do have short memories. So I would love for sustainability to be at the forefront. I would love for us to start to travel more carefully. I mean, just because you can fly to return flight from England to Poland, some unpronounceable city in Poland, and just to drink cheap beer for the sake of just doing it. I think I heard this somebody else saying, but it's very true. Why would you do it? What is the point of that? You know, what is the offset? But who am I to preach? If that's what somebody wants to do, because the airline ticket is cheap and the beer is available, then that's the way that we are kind of we've been doing this for a very, very long time. Now the earth is breathing a little more easily if we want to touch on some green stuff, but I'm enjoying that. And I have also realized that everybody else, I miss seeing my friends and colleagues in the industry, and I miss being with them. But this is also a way of communicating, and we can certainly save what we could save us. We are more available to one another because we're not always flying off on a business trip, quite frankly. And I've heard this being said again and again and again. Greg mentioned it very early on. He can actually get hold of people. Well, that's a nice thing for starters. So there is a lot in here, and I think that that's all part of the reset. And hopefully some of it will stick, because we can do things better than we have done before the horrendous pandemic arrived.
Yeah, absolutely. And a follow-up comment to David's question from Daniel Zelling is basically saying, confirming, yes, that's a great question. And he says his hope would be that a good part of the industry evolved from just selling beds and meeting rooms to maybe broader levels with a better diversification, and that there won't be a reason to go back to the older models. So I think everyone has that kind of sense of, yeah, this is an opportunity to change. He does go on to say that perhaps that won't be possible for 100% of the hotels and not in all locations. That's a fair point. Let's see what will happen to the ones that are not that flexible. And he also mentions that perhaps governments need to help them out, or will they just simply disappear? So as everyone says at the moment, I guess no one really knows. All right. One other question. This is great. We're getting some great feedback here from some people now. Question from Metin Sportman, who is the head of sales at Meeting Point Hotels in Turkey. His question is, what do you think of merging or applying new reassurance programs or funds for the insurance companies that will support and initiate the governments to set up new data protection and management policies? As we mine end users' data, not necessarily in tourism industry only, but utilizing efficient travel tech, CRM channels to integrate their loyalty programs and form global alliances with other market providers. What do you think about that? Michaela, you spoke about loyalty earlier. Perhaps would you like to address that one?
That was a large question. So I got half of it, I think.
Would you like me to repeat the last part?
Yes, please.
So he's asking, as we mine end users' data, not necessarily in tourism industry, but by utilizing efficient travel technology, CRM channels, to integrate their loyalty programs and form global alliances with other market providers. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that question was coming from Turkey, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think we have and I think he was also talking about the government and dealing with the insurance companies.
Right.
So I think this is a very local aspect where, because we know that in Germany we have very different laws than in the UK, for instance. And then when it comes to Turkey, it might be totally different. But I think that has been exactly discussed here in a session in Germany recently, and I think that's a great idea and should be looked at. But across borders will be difficult.
Okay. We have another comment from Eric Rogers, who's head of EME sales and global accounts at TRAVHOTECH. And it's just a comment. It's not a question at all, but I think it's an interesting one. Some hotels actually terminated their staff and turfed them out as soon as the lockdown started. Frankly, I think they will suffer with finding loyal staff going forward. Mark, I see you nodding your head there.
Yeah, well, it's happened here in a major way, and you've got two ends of the street basically. Some have basically gotten rid of everyone, even as soon as days after the lockdowns began, and maybe even before in some cases, and it's continued on. And then you've got some who have looked after their staff. So it's going to be very interesting just reading some of the sentiment around town about attitudes, both from the guest and the staff about what happens post-crisis.
Right. I don't know about here. Have you seen that, Charlotte and Michaela, in Europe? Have we seen any of that? I'm not aware of that in Europe.
No, not to the same extent I would expect, like to for example in America. But again, just back to the point that people have long memories, so so that staff, when there will be some openings, they are hopefully not going to go back to those types of companies. Again, this boils down to communication, and I think everybody, and we see stories certainly across Europe, everybody can understand the severity of the situation, but where managements have kept very, very strong communication going internally, and when they have stated in grand terms that we're all in it together, they really truly were in it together. They either put their own salaries on hold for the first quarter, or they have also taken a week's holiday. They have asked people to go down part-time. They have themselves actually led by example. I see a lot of loyalty from the employers of those types of companies, and I'm happy to work with a few that behave like that. It will come back to roost, I think.
Yeah.
I agree with Charlotte, and I've seen that as well, but I've also seen other. So I've also seen what Mark pointed out, and very sad. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we need to look more for quality than expanding into markets and spending money everywhere, not for maybe employees who are really building a company.
Yeah.
Well, we also don't have the employment contracts in the U.S. like they do in Europe. So they can, it's labor at will. Which I think has a big difference on the two. The thing on a separate note, the thing that's going to be interesting to see is that first person that is denied boarding on an airplane because he has a fever, and it doesn't go into a CRM on his record. So when 3 weeks later, when he tries to get on a plane, he's denied boarding again. Or does someone sue a hotel because he has a fever and they won't let him stay there? And it's not because of COVID, it's because he has strep throat or he has an infected finger that's doing that. So, and then where did all the privacy go? I mean, they're talking about all these things going on. What happened to GDPR and what happened to the California? I mean, that's a whole piece we haven't even started to look at yet, where they're saying we want to be able to take everyone's temperature as they walk in. I mean, I remember flying into parts of Asia where I walked by a thermal scanner, and they showed it. And if you showed up bright pink, they pulled you out of line to find out what was going on with you. And a lot of times, well, I've been in Asia for a week. I mean, who doesn't have a fever from that you've been traveling there, that you've been with what you've been doing? So, but
it can happen.
That's a whole different thing. It's going to happen as we start to come back. These people that are, I think, overreacting sometimes, but I understand it's an understandable overreaction. But the first time I say, Mark, you can't stay at my hotel because you have a fever, and you turn around and hit me with a lawsuit for discrimination, or you won't let me walk into a casino, or I sat at a casino playing blackjack and I can prove the guy next to me coughed on me and got me sick, and I say you're not allowed to be there. That's a whole new can of worms that's going to be opened up. That until they get their hands around that, that'll be another piece that'll slow the recovery.
Yeah, I think you're right, Craig. And I think perhaps you might even be getting ahead of everything a little bit by saying what you're saying. But with that said, it's definitely worth considering now, because you're right, GDPR has to be considered. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about people having to download this COVID-19 app onto your smartphone that validates that you are COVID-19 free. Now, what happens if, for some reason or not, you personally don't want to download that app because you want your privacy secured? Are they going to single you out and say, well, hey, without that app, buddy, you ain't moving anywhere? So it's going to be an interesting dynamic.
That they are, because a couple of airports already in the world have started to charge for sort of somewhat as close as you can get to on-the-spot tests, and if you don't take the test, you're in quarantine for 2 weeks. And going back to Greg's point, I think the data side of this is going to become very important, because there's every country with every system, and you know, if you're going to let someone into your hotel, wherever it is in the world, temperature is not enough. You know, I actually had coronavirus, and I didn't really run a temperature, maybe for one day, and then after that, no problem. So that's not going to pick it up. There's going to have to be something far more stringent and much more shareable across, you know, any public-facing business to address this.
Yeah, and the other side of this is that, you know, the results of all of this are only as good as your last test, right? And so what does that exactly mean, right? And I think that's where, coming back to this whole legal aspect and how you approach this, this is what's going to become so important about how you respond to all of this. It's not a question about just making your hotels clean. It's about doing the right thing and thinking everything through, as opposed to just having a knee-jerk reaction that actually says, okay, look, you know, we're going to do this because we heard it over here or because these guys are doing that. You really need to think this thing through, because I think this is where we're going to have a lot of problems coming forward.
Yeah, agreed. All right, guys, there's two more points I'd like to cover because we're getting some great feedback here. And there's one here from a very old friend of mine from my Asian days, Mr. Srihash Bandari. Sri, wonderful to know that you're tuning in, my friend. Great to see your comment here. He basically confirms that contactless service will be the new normal, considering that this will be what we need, that many service staff that we used to have in the past. So definitely contactless as well. And also another old friend of mine, Olaf Slater, has also perhaps left a question in relation to sustainability. He says that there has recently been a growth of adoption in retail for sustainability proven products, example, organic eggs, that are even more expensive but showcase an eco-balance score on the package. Have we started to see more acceptance in the hotels for partaking in similar benchmarks and making that information available to consumers? Example, in the direct distribution channel. So again, I think that's a good question, and I think, Olaf, yes, we will start to see that type of thing. I don't know if others on the session agree with me, but I think we will.
Yes,
I agree.
And final question, I think, from Dr. Zelling. If allowed, B, then would anyone status quo today consider going to a trade show such as WTM London at all? My guess is they all will be cancelled in the end, but how to plan ahead right now? I think, Daniel, the reality is plan for 2021.
Yeah.
That would be my response. Okay, guys, we've gone for 90 minutes. It's been wonderful having you on this session. Thank you all so much for taking the time and making yourselves available. We really do appreciate it. As with our previous sessions, this is the recording will be made available on our website, and we'll also be doing a summary as well that will be available for download on our website and posted as well. So for those watching and listening, if you haven't already and you're interested to see from the previous sessions, the feedback and the comments that we got, please do visit our website. You go to the collective sessions, you'll see all of that data there. And I'm hoping that it will provide some assistance for you, no matter on what side of the spectrum you may be positioned on, whether you're the hotelier, the hotel owner, the hotel company, the consultant, the vendor, possibly even the student who's wondering, what are we going to do with our careers moving forward? Which, moving into the next session, is our actual next collective session, which is all about next gen. That's coming up this Friday. So make sure that you tune in for that one as well, because we've got some great people coming on from some local hotel schools here in Switzerland. Okay, guys, thank you all so much. It's been a great pleasure having you here. We do appreciate it. And until next time, hasta la vista.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.